This video is now in session, and last night, news outlets called the Senate for the Democratic Party because Nevada went to Catherine Cortez Masto. And before I go on with this video, I just want to say how ironic it is that after hundreds of millions of dollars spent, a ton of blood, sweat, and tears shed by both parties, the result is you have every single incumbent senator in this election winning their seats. The only difference here is that Pennsylvania goes from Republican to Democratic. So, that just is kind of funny considering that, again, Democrats spent hundreds of millions of dollars on a ton of these races, and so did the Republican Party. But let's get on with this video. So, Kirsten Sinema and Joe Manchin, as you've known for the past 2 years, has been incredibly powerful in the fact that they have opposed a ton of Democratic bills and become the ultimate power brokers in the Senate. So how would that change with this kind of election? Well, let's first talk about Georgia, because even though Georgia will no longer decide the majority of whoever claims the majority, in the end, it will still be an important seat, considering that if you have 51 Democratic senators, that could change the dynamics a little bit between Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema. So let's just say first that Herschel Walker, the Republican candidate, wins out against Warnock, which is a possibility. That would mean mostly the same thing. And the reason why is because both of these senators, Sinema and Manchin, have been pretty successful at gaining attention with their ability to negotiate and to ask for concessions. So if everything's going well, why change? Now for Sinema, that might actually be a little bit different, considering that she has probably a very strong primary challenge coming up soon when she is going through her re-election campaign in 2024. So that might mean that Sinema becomes a little bit more Democratic to actually get through that primary system. But you still have Joe Manchin, and in a 50-50 split, every senator needs to vote in favor, which means that Joe Manchin would simply absorb the power that Sinema had and just become the singular power broker in the Senate. So that would, either way, not much would really change in terms of what Democrats could get passed. You might have a little bit less rankling, if you remember from the Inflation Reduction Act and how those negotiations went, but in the end, it still is the same thing. So that's what happens if Herschel Walker wins. Now let's just say that Raphael Warnock wins, which we think as of now is more likely. So if this happens, we think that 3 scenarios could happen. The first scenario is that Sinema and Manchin continue to be the ultimate power brokers in Washington, and the only difference is that they would be like salespeople rather than the boss. The boss would become the Democratic Party, because at this point, Democrats would really only need one of these 2 senators to actually agree on concessions. So if Joe Manchin opposes something, but Kirsten Sinema is in agreement of the entire bill, then Kirsten Sinema wins out. If Kirsten Sinema wants exemptions for tax exemptions for wealthy people, and then Joe Manchin wants additional coal factories in his state, then Democrats don't have to have both concessions, don't need to concede both points, but instead, they can just choose whichever offer they deem as better. And that's why you might start to see these 2 individuals as salespeople who are trying to duke each other out, because they will still want their concessions to go through in the Democratic bill, and the Democrats' bill, but they know that only one can win out, and they might make some concessions of their own to make a better compromise that will allow the Democrats to agree with them instead of the other side. So that's the first scenario. The second scenario is that Sinema becomes the ultimate power broker. And the reason why this could occur is because you have to recognize that Joe Manchin is up for re-election in 2024. And that is pretty bad for him, considering it's a presidential election year, and there are people who will definitely vote down ballot no matter what. So if you're talking about West Virginia, which is an incredibly Republican state, he needs every single vote possible, and that might mean he might have to be a little bit more conforming to Republican policies and start to reject a bunch of Democratic bills no matter what, which is what he did back in the Obama administration, and he was pretty successful at that. He got a win in 2012 by 24 percentage points, and all he did was just oppose a ton of Obama bills, and no one complained at that time because Democrats had a 55-seat majority. The only reason why people are complaining now is because Joe Manchin, his vote is necessary for Democrats to actually get bills passed. So in this scenario with 51-50, Manchin might just stop compromising with the Democratic Party and simply oppose everything in order to be more favorable for Republican voters. Now, what does this mean for Kyrsten Sinema? She will just absorb the power that Joe Manchin had and would be the power broker that Democrats would have to go to. So that's the second scenario. The third scenario is that Sinema becomes more democratic. And the reason why this might happen is she has a ton of challengers who want to go against her for the 2024 election. You already have Ruben Gallego, a progressive, who has expressed interest in primary and Kyrsten Sinema. And if you look at these polls, Sinema loses in every single one of them against any challenger that these pollsters have named. Now, I guess a caveat is that these polls were conducted months ago, but even then, Sinema might view this as a threat to her election chances, and she might become more democratic in order to avoid a real primary challenger. What does that mean? Democrats have 50 strong, solid votes that are in favor of them for the entire time, which means that Joe Manchin's vote really doesn't matter at that point. And Joe Manchin would just oppose every single bill. So basically, the second scenario, the only difference is that Sinema also relinquishes her power as a negotiator. So those are the three scenarios. The first, both of them are salespeople. The second, Sinema absorbs Manchin's power. The third, both powers go away and the Democrats get what they want. But you also have to consider that there are many more senators who might start to try to become more powerful in the Senate because their elections are at stake too in 2024. You have very vulnerable senators like John Tester in Montana, as well as Sherrod Brown in Ohio, Tammy Baldwin in Wisconsin, Jackie Rosen in Nevada, Bob Casey in Pennsylvania, even maybe, I don't know, Angus King in Maine. So with all of that, I mean, and you also might have Bernie Sanders, who might try to leverage his power to make more progressive bills. So there's a lot at stake between now and 2024, and all of this, we'll have to see how all of this happens. But first, Democrats would have to win Georgia with Raphael Warnock. But until then, that's the end of this video. Hope you enjoyed it. This video is now adjourned, and I'll see you in the next one.